Good morning and welcome to the latest in our webinar series. This marks a year of doing webinars.
Wow.
So we've been going.
Time flies.
Time does fly. So good morning, Graham, and
morning,
welcome.
Ricky. Thank you. Morning, everybody.
So as always, if you're joining us, that's great. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to know where you're dialing in from this morning or this afternoon or this. Well, it'd be nighttime for some people around the world, I'm sure, but not that we're expecting you to get up necessarily for this. But if you could drop us a note, let us know where you are. Is it sunny? Is it raining? That'd be really cool to know who we're talking to and where you're dialing in from this morning. So good morning, Louise. I've got a feeling I know where Louise is dialing in from.
Where are you guessing?
I'm guessing it's sunny Stoke. Well, not far. Look, Newcastle under Lyme. Awful weather. Well, we're sorry about that, Louise. We can fix many things, but the weather is beyond our control, sadly. Anybody else want to share who they are, where they're dialing in from, and a weather update as well? Because it's always nice to start with the weather, isn't it? What's your weather like, Graham?
We have had a bit of rain this morning. A bit overcast at the moment.
Bit
question, of course, is will I get my washing out or not?
Well, that I'm not certainly not going to be bothering with that for me. So let's kick off, shall we? So welcome everybody. Today's webinar is all about leading successful change, and Graham and I have got some ideas that we'd love to share with you, all about kind of key elements that are going to really help you to land change. Good morning, Leslie, by the way, and it's always wet north of the border, I think, isn't it? I'm not sure whether that's true or not. I know you either get it really, really awesome or it's kind of miserable, but welcome, Leslie, along with that. So the agenda for today, leading successful change. Let's dive in. Let's kind of look at what we're going to cover in a little bit more detail. So Graham and I are going to unpack why change efforts fall short. We're going to help you with defining the shift that you're aiming for. We're going to help you to understand how to evaluate your team's change readiness, and we've got a tool that we've created and road tested when we've had some great feedback from people that have helped us to refine it even more. And we're going to talk about storytelling. We're going to talk about how we can create these compelling stories that inspire people to want to come on the journey with us. And as always, we've got time for a Q&A at the end. What would be really helpful is if you do have any questions, to drop them in the comments in the chat, and lead with a Q. So capital Q, that helps Graham and I to dig out your questions really quickly amongst all the comments that we typically get on these sessions. So that's the plan. As always, we wanted to share a little bit about thinking focus. We are a behavioral change business. We work all over the world helping individuals and teams to get out their own way. We want to help them to all become high performing. So whether it's about being better leaders, better managers, for us, it's about accelerating change. It's about developing high performance cultures and boosting productivity. And we've been doing that now. We just passed our 9th birthday, haven't we, Graham?
We have, yeah. Happy birthday, us.
So on the 1st of June, we turned 9. And in that time, since 2016, we've worked with probably 165 clients or so, well over 10,000 participants now, and probably in the region of 6,500 coaching sessions that we've run. But it's all about metacognition, or as we prefer to say, helping individuals and teams, business units, to be more effective, to understand how they think and how that can unlock their potential when we get that right. So that's a little bit about us. More than happy to share more if you want to know. But let's talk about change. Let's talk about why change efforts fall short. And for us, we got kind of two ideas that we want to share with you. One is this concept of the marathon effect. And the marathon effect really comes from, if you think about certainly the changes I've been involved in my early kind of corporate experience, I always remember feeling that we never seem to embed the last change before starting on the next one. Now, leaders are often impatient by nature. We know that. They're striving to move the business forward. That's their job. That's what they're tasked to do. But the problem is that your people can become fatigued and tired of what feels like relentless change. And we liken this to a marathon. So you've got the elite runners at the beginning of the race, and they're ready to go. And actually, by the time they've run their race in probably 2 hours or less, the rest of the field are probably just starting to get to the front of the line to start their race. So these elite runners, your leaders, are done and dusted. They're back with their feet up because they've kind of done their bit. But the rest of the organization, or the rest of the runners in this case, are just getting over that start line. They're just starting on their race. And of course, their race isn't a 2-hour race. Probably somewhere between 3.5, 5 hours, depending on the type of runner they are. But they're not at the front. They're not making the decisions. They're not clear about why all this is happening. And that's why we kind of liken change to this marathon effect, where you got those at the front making decisions. They've moved on by the time these people are getting to the start line. Would you add anything, Graham, to that?
No, I did think I know we were talking about before we came on air that when I first came across this concept, I think it's if you think about the London Marathon as one that I guess most people link in with. I mean, you even see people, don't you, like 24 hours later, they're so far behind your first runners. And I just think it's a really useful analogy to have in mind that, you know, your senior leadership team are typically your Mo Farahs of the world. As you say, they're done, dusted, possibly on to the next one. And you've got somebody, you know, who I would liken to the person collecting, you know, two buckets collecting coins for charity, who's never going to get over the finish line.
The dinosaur costume.
Yeah, in a fast time. And I think in businesses we forget that, and we think because there's a good chunk of people already crossed the finish line, everybody else should soon be there. But the reality is, you know, say London Marathon, 24 hours later, you've still got some people who are still going strong, determined to finish. So no, I don't think I'd add anything more than just I think it's a really useful analogy.
And I think it's really interesting, this disconnect, because it's frustrating for both the people in the business and leaders, because leaders are impatient. They want to get on with stuff, but the people are going, can we just finish this one first? So they're quite literally in different time zones at times.
Yeah. And it almost feels like you're halfway through a marathon and someone's dropping another marathon on you before you finish the first one. Yeah.
Because change, particularly organizational change, tends not to be small, does it? It tends to be quite meaningful, quite sizable, and quite complex in the way that the organizations present that. Let's give you a second theory then, the squished middle. Now, the squished middle, or the jelly layer, as one of my clients call these people, these are the managers who are expected to champion the change, yet probably haven't even negotiated the impact of the change for themselves. So it's really hard to be a champion for something you're still processing, particularly when you haven't worked out, what does this mean for me? What does this mean for my role and also my family and other things that sit around that, maybe your team and stuff like that. And then you think about it, they've got these leaders who are demanding of them. They want progress, they want updates, and they're expecting it all to fall into place because that's the plan. That's what they were promised, certainly in terms of the project management side of things. And at the same time, these managers are stuck in the middle. They're getting pressure from below. and their teams are demanding reasons and rationale for the change because they don't yet understand. And of course, what happens if they don't understand? We covered this a lot in the webinar that we did last month. You start to build resistance. So resistance normally is going to be fueled by what people believe is happening, not what is necessarily happening. So they will make up their stories. They will make up what makes sense to them. And it's rarely what we want them to think. It's their version of events, their version of reality. And unless we loop them in, unless we equip this squish middle with the tools, with the information, and with the skills to be able to help their people navigate the change, they're going to be caught between the rock and a hard place. And that's quite literally this jelly layer, as one of my clients, as I said, call them the squished middle, however you want to term it. But fundamentally, we're not making life easy for our managers because we're kind of compacting them top and from the bottom as well. Again, Graham, would you add anything to that?
No, it's. I think you covered it really well there, Ricky. Having been a jelly manager,
it's a rite of passage. We all are.
Yeah, I definitely felt that pain where you're and you get the question, why hasn't so and so in your team got on board with the change yet? So it almost feels like you failed because someone's still resisting. Yeah,
absolutely. Okay. Let's move on. So we would like some participation. It's the usual process. We're using Slido, so you can either access via the QR code or you can access at slido.com. The hashtag is TF Webinars. That's the event code that it will be asking for. And what I'm really interested in here is thinking about an upcoming change, or it might be a change that you're kind of in the early stages of. How ready are your colleagues to embrace that change? And we've got 4 kind of guidelines here for you. They're ready, bring it on. We'll need some support. We'll need a lot of support. And you just know you're in for a battle here. They're going to fight it. So if you could give us your take on what you believe your colleagues' readiness to changes on this particular example. Brilliant. We've got some people contributing. So whether you're in the webinar, watching live on LinkedIn, watching live on YouTube, feel free to get into the debate. All opinions, we really do value your contribution and getting stuck in and involved in this. Okay, so we've got some answers here. So there's nobody necessarily from the group that we've got that are ready, bring it on. And interestingly, we've got nobody that you think is going to fight this, but there is degrees of support that are going to be required. And that's really interesting because I think in any change situation, it's never going to be straightforward. There are going to be things that we think about that we should have thought about before, but only emerge as new information or new scenarios become prevalent. And therefore, then we start to go, oh, perhaps we should have thought about that. So inevitably, we should always plan to support our people through change. So that's really, really interesting. Thank you for that. Any insights, Graham?
I think the support piece, the challenge, again, go back to the squished middle, your jelly layer. I think the challenge we have is that support needs to be individualized as well. So if you've got a team of 10 people, all 10 people will need, well, they won't all need something different, but you're going to have, probably 3 or 4 different strategies you need to help them through. So when we recognize that people need a layer of support or a level of support, the next question I guess you need to answer is, and what support do they need? And I think sometimes we make assumptions about the type of help people need rather than going, let's go and ask them. Let's go and ask everybody in my team what it is they need. You might not be able to provide it all right now, but at least if you know what it is, then you're more of a fighting chance for helping them.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, for those that attended last month, we did lots on helping individuals through change, helping them navigate through that, and that's available on our YouTube channel. The recording from that session is available, so you can dial into that at any time that suits you, and watch the webinar and catch the content, like Graham says, that's going to help you to work out what type of support are individuals going to need and at what stage. So look out for that helpful resource that we built for you last time round. Okay, thank you very much for that. So I'm going to hand you over to Graham now, who's going to talk about some roles in change. So what type of roles do we see, and how do they play out when we go through this organisational change piece?
Yeah, thanks, Rick. And I think we've started to touch on this a little bit, haven't we? That there will be different roles, there'll be different, if like, characters or different responsibilities. And I think it's worthwhile thinking about each of these. And again, if you're reflecting on a change that you're going through right now, or a change that's coming up, or possibly, it's unlikely there's no change going on in your organization, because most organizations change is happening all the time. There might be a past one, and think about, so do you recognize who fulfilled each of these roles, or who is fulfilling each of these roles right now? So the first one is there will be some people, and it normally is a group of people, who are part of your change leadership team. So this includes a number of people usually, but if you could think about one role, I guess that most change should have, it would be a sponsor. So think about projects and programs, those large pieces of work. There's normally going to be a sponsor involved, the kind of person that will drive the momentum, hopefully helps you to remove roadblocks, and is motivating the team through the change. Also sitting alongside this, those people that take on a change leadership role should be a good strategist. So when they've thought about kind of the vision, the aims of the change, what's that vision look like? How do we bring it to life? What's the call to arms that we need to be sharing with people in our organization? And again, ideally at this level, the people who are sharing the why of the change, the why it's important, the why we need to kind of move from where we are to where we want to get to. Ideally, great storytellers. So creating what we call a fellowship, those people that want to be on board with the change, but it's helping build a narrative for themselves, in terms of helping them get through the change, but they can share with kind of that middle layer of management that can then be shared throughout the organization. So there'll definitely be some change leadership roles, these people who are responsible for the why of the change and the overall vision. So again, think about who's fulfilling that role within your organization with the change you may have going on. What we next have is we move on to our change managers. And change management is actually about the process of change. So this is about the planning, this is about the organizing, this is about the problem solving. A much more hands-on type role than our change leadership. And we see this as being more about the what of change. Probably also dealing with the most difficult people issues. Sometimes these people are volunteered or conscripted into these roles. Ideally, you'd want somebody in this kind of, with this level of responsibility, to be volunteering for it themselves, but more often than not, it's a role that we find given to ourselves. And again, if we're not fully bought into the change ourselves, this can be a challenge for us. So maybe we're having to ask questions of the change leaders. So we've got someone responsible for the why at change leadership level. We've got someone responsible for the what at a change management level. What we also recognize that can be really helpful in organizations are change champions. And we've worked with a lot of clients who've been putting in place change, and they create a role. It's not normally a full-time role, but they create the responsibilities around a change champion. Typically, it's more of a local resource that helps people through the change. Say typically an additional responsibility to an existing role. But what change champions often have is earlier access to information, because we recognize the importance of them in helping and driving the change through the business. Ideally, these people need to be supportive of the change themselves, and part of their role is helping the transition move on fairly quickly. Can be a diverse population, can be people at all levels, can be people from all types of roles. But who are your local change champions? Those people who are banging the drum of the change. And then there's probably one of our larger populations is the people who are impacted. So if you think about change at an organizational level, say it's a structural change, there'll be a good number of people impacted. So what that means is their role or their way of working may change. Sometimes it's in subtle ways, sometimes it's in very explicit ways. And here it's one of those roles of people, or the group of people who, if they've not got the right information, if they've not got the full information, are likely to be making up their own stories, as Ricky's mentioned. And the challenge is that the belief about where the change is going to go is not the same as the reality. Again, as Ricky mentioned, we talked about this quite a lot in the last webinar, but key things here when we think about the people who have been impacted or will be impacted by the change. What are they going to gain? What's in it for them? And typically, we try and sell change based on, here's the good stuff, here's what you'll gain, here's the benefits. But the reality is, unless we've tailored those benefits to them as a group of people, they're not necessarily going to be as interested in it as you might as a change manager or as part of the change leadership team. One of the other challenges, though, is, of course, this group of people will have some loss. And what we recognise is all change involves loss. And you can only really understand that if you see it from their perspective. And the loss sometimes is something that we wouldn't view as being important, but they do. It can be small things. We worked with one organisation many years ago, and the change meant they were moving to new premises, meant they couldn't have typically their desks have been surrounded with family photos and all those kind of things that make it your own area. And because they're moving to hot desking, that stuff you couldn't do anymore. And whilst it's not seen to be a big change at organisation level, it clearly has personal impact, because I'm coming to a workspace that doesn't feel like mine anymore. So people impacted, think about what they gain, think about what they might lose. And as we touched on last time round, there'll be a whole load of stuff that will stay the same for them. And again, we need to be communicating that. There could then be, kind of anybody else or everybody else that doesn't neatly fit into one of those groups. Because change can have a far-reaching impact for us. Some people imagine the worst-case scenarios. Some people create stories from the few bits of information that they have. But recognise that we need to make it personal for anybody and everybody involved with the change. This could even be some of our suppliers or even the community in which we operate in. And recognise that everybody will have questions. How do we create a forum for people to raise those questions? So we can split people into these groups. It looks like it's quite a nice, it's this. But let's consider there will be other stakeholders too outside of this. So we may have investors who aren't an obvious thought for us in terms of the change. There might be our executive team who presumably have been part of the initial discussions. But how do we keep them updated on how the change is going on? We touched on suppliers. There might be customers, might be local community. I was working with one organisation a few years ago, and they were moving their head office. And the impact on the local community was massive in terms of taxi companies, in terms of small local shops, people who over the years had come to rely on this very large organisation. So the change that organisation went through meant that other businesses were affected as well. So it's not as easy as going, it's just this small group of people, but recognise we do need to think about people, we do need to think about the roles that they fulfil and what the responsibilities are that come with those roles. And again, as Rick has mentioned, we did touch on a lot of this stuff in the last webinar. We also did a previous webinar on workplace politics, which you might find helpful to go back and check out on. That was back in March. I think we did that one, Ricky, wasn't it?
It was, yeah.
So when we're thinking about change, one of the things we recognise is it can be useful to have a bit of a plan. It can be useful to have some steps along the way. So we're going to move on to look at 5 successful steps to change. And we're going to dive into the detail that sits behind some of these. So we're going to start off with vision and purpose, recognise that we need that level of clarity. How do we create the future state people are going to want to move towards? Building something we call a guiding coalition. I'm going to talk about that. Doing some kind of gap analysis between where we are now and where we want to get to, and then think about some key projects along the way. So Ricky, over to you. Let's talk about how do we define the shift that we're looking for.
Thanks, Graham. I think just before we get into that, I think one of the key aspects of the other group in your change groupings of leaders through to everyone else is the everyone else group gets assumed. I remember being involved in some change where we kind of just went, well, it doesn't affect them, so we'll not bother. And the problem is them not being affected is not the way they see it, because they kind of start to create these stories that go, what does this mean for me? What does this mean for everything else? What does this mean for colleagues who they've worked with for years? So actually they are starting to make stories. So we do need to have a strategy for other people, even if it's to say nothing's changing, because the fact that nothing's changing is important to let them know rather than let them assume it, because we've not told them, therefore it's not an issue. So always think about all of those audiences when you're dealing with change, because when you make some assumptions like I did and fell foul of that, you can get caught out, and actually you end up having to circle back and putting more energy into that because you've just made some assumptions around it. So just a personal experience and a watch out for you there. So let's have a look at vision and purpose. This is made up of three key things. This is the why, the what, and KPIs. So the why is the compelling vision. Why this? Why now? What makes this more important? Why this and not something else, for example. And the what is starting to sell a vision of what the future could be, what the future looks like, how we will be when we grow up, as we like to say. And of course, KPIs are really crucial because they're the indicators that are going to tell you that we're on plan, on course, and it'll also be a key barometer of when we've hit what we said we would. So we will be number one in our field. We will be the market leader. However you choose to define that future vision, that future purpose for your organization, we've got to measure it. Otherwise, how will we know when we've got there? So vision and purpose is all about the why, the what, and those KPIs to determine whether we've hit it or not. Let's unpack this why in a bit more detail then. So the why is all about these benefits. What are we going to gain? What are we going to gain from changing? What are we going to gain from being this new super duper version of ourselves? So what are the benefits? What are the benefits to the company, to customers, to our people, to other stakeholders? And like I said, why this? Why now? And we're really looking to create some motivation, some towards motivation. Because that's exciting. It's intriguing. Let's be a part of something meaningful. But you can't just rely on a towards motivator. We also need to build what we call some away from motivation, which is, so what happens if we don't change? So what are the risks? What's going to happen to our organization if we stay the same? Because the old adage, if you're staying the same, you're actually moving backwards. What's the impact for the company? What's the impact for our customers, for our people? And this helps you to start to build this burning platform. The burning platform means it gets you going, but it will sustain you for a period of time. And that's why the towards motivation is important, because that will maintain the momentum as you move forward. So like we've said, why this? Why now? And what's in it for whom? We're also looking at what happens when we don't, what are the risks, and who are they for? Who do they affect? And can we create this burning platform to get us energized and moving forward, and create some of that pace that the leaders inevitably want? Then, of course, there's the what. So what specifically is going to change? Can you create an oh moment where people get it, where people suddenly connect with what you're trying to create, and describe the change in a way that is clear and simple enough for others to understand. You might get it. In your mind, it might be absolutely clear. But how do you help them to see it the way you see it? How do you help them to see this future that we're trying to create for the organization, this better future? Because in my experience, whilst we might get change wrong from time to time, whilst it might not go to plan or as expected, I'm not aware of anybody who starts to change to make things worse. They're trying to improve something. They're trying to make things better, whether it's for our customers, for our people, or hopefully for the ecosystem of stakeholders that we have. But this is about timeline. What is about timeline? It's about being more specific. It's about creating this universal meaning of by 2030, we will be. And the other thing is, we don't have to be fixed. It can be changed. Goals are movable feasts. And the reason they're movable feasts is because new information emerges, particularly when you're working on big seismic organizational change. So we need to set the scene that actually this is our current understanding and our current plan. And sometimes we might need to deviate from that. But it's a tweak. It's not, right, that's not working. Because hopefully we've done our thinking at the very beginning. But let's create a clear and compelling why and a clear, compelling what. And then the KPIs. Well, this is about how you measure whether it's working or not. Are we on track? Are we moving forward? And we'll measure lots of areas. But what we really need to do is go, what are the 3 or 4 that will really tell us? Are they financial metrics? Are they operational metrics? Are they people metrics, customer metrics? Doesn't matter what they are, it's what's meaningful to you as an organization, to your team, that give you a sense of we're making progress, we're on track. But if you measure everything, you'll just get consumed with data, and actually you'll probably learn nothing. Whereas if you can go, these are the 3 or 4 levers that if we pull them are going to make all the difference for us. So
yeah, thanks, Rick. I think the other thing that on your KPI piece there is, you say it's having only 3 or 4, isn't it? It's not going, it's going to be these 20 things we need to measure. It's not making it really, really complex. It's how do you boil it down to a small number of things that feels manageable for people, that become easy for us to measure within our normal day-to-day run of doing things, rather than trying to create brand new measures and brand new ways of recording how we do things.
Yeah.
And I think that the as we think about that vision piece, and we talked about kind of from a change leadership point of view, how do we create compelling stories that inspire people to action? If you think about why people tell stories, from a change point of view, I mean, I guess why tell stories? Generally, we tell stories to recount information, to inspire people, to make people laugh. There's a whole number of reasons why we're doing it. But from a change point of view, why we're looking to create a compelling story is for a couple of things. One, it's how we create the vision of the future, how we help people feel that future can be real, can be something that we can achieve. And by creating stories, what it does is it helps cut through the resistance that some people have, particularly if it feels like it's compelling. And as Ricky mentioned, in terms of the different groups you've got, no one sets out to make life worse for people through change. There might be a really small population, either in your organization or within that wider network of stakeholders, who the change is not good for. But in the majority of instances, for 95% of people, the change will be positive. That's why we do it. And compelling stories, as we create these stories, we can build a shared belief much faster than just sharing a set of slides. And quite often we see people who share slides of stats and figures and all that kind of stuff on using images or using quotes from people within the organization can be much more powerful for us. So when we think about the future state, there's a number of things, a number of areas that are useful for us to consider and to build on. And the first one of those is our mindset. What kind of mindset do we want people to be in? Do we need people to be in? Are they kind of fixed on where they are now, and therefore is a change going to be a challenge for them? Or have they got a more of what we call a growth mindset? Are they more open to change? What that mindset does as we work up, it starts to build our beliefs and our values. So typically what happens is the way we think determines the actions that we take. And what we do is we form habits around those things, and they become our habitual actions, they're built on our beliefs, they're our behaviors. It's just our way of doing things. And this, what we recognize is kind of one of the biggest challenges with change, is actually we try and change actions and behaviors without thinking about the stuff that sits underneath it. And what that leads us to create is what language are we using, what stories are we creating, and what can be really helpful is to kind of flip this on its head. Is go, if we can start with compelling stories, with using typically positive but the right kind of language, compelling language that excites people, what then that's likely to do is to make people want to change how they do things. They'll start to change the actions that they take. That helps them to change their habits and their routines. It helps them to behave in the way that we need them to do likewise. And that means we form new beliefs that either link to our existing values or start to tweak our values a little bit, which creates a much more of a growth mindset for us. So that's what we're trying to do when we create those compelling stories from a future state point of view. And what this means for us is, can we pick a moment, pick something that is specific and can be really compelling, rather than trying to paint this really big picture that kind of lands small points with everybody but doesn't really land everything for anybody. So can we pick a concrete moment, one point that we can build on that can help people see clarity around, where we can build real people and places and build stories around those kind of things? That authenticity helps hook people's attention, which again is typically when we go through change, while we try and create stories of parts of the business where it's already working, which we might do through kind of trials or pilot programs or those kind of things. What that creates is that kind of the oh moment, as Ricky says, or the aha moment for people in terms of the positive surprise. So it highlights what people are getting, highlights, if we've used real stories, what people have already got from the change going forward. What we might do then is stop before kind of we get to the moral of the story. We've painted such a clear picture that people can finish the story in their heads for themselves, so they can see where they might go in terms of the next steps. And again, as we talked about in the last webinar, giving people some choice can be really helpful. So allowing them to kind of create those next steps for themselves means that then they create their own call to action. They feel like they're part of the next chapter of this story, the next part of growth in your organization. So it can be really helpful to think about it from that point of view. And part of this will be the responsibility we mentioned in terms of those groups of people. Part of this could be why we need a guiding coalition, why we need to think about our groups of people. And think for a minute of the definition of the word guide. It's kind of someone who shows a way, it's someone who directs the development of. And so it ties in really nicely with the kind of that story piece we've just looked at. So when you're thinking about your guiding coalition, it's about getting the right team, getting the right expertise, and part of that expertise might be someone who can create compelling stories and present in a really compelling way. How does guiding coalition focus on the key priorities? The phrase that we often use with clients is the big hows. What are the big things that you need to be focusing on? How then do we measure those key priorities? Can we build in smart goals, smart sub-goals, all those kind of things? Making sure that we review this stuff regularly. A guiding coalition will meet, will review, will track progress. And what that might mean from that kind of that senior leadership point of view is, if they're conducting the review, what's our course correction? Where might we need to change things and move in a slightly different way? What successes can we celebrate with people? What that also might mean then is we need to review the structure. So is it working? Is the new structure working for us? What are our priorities? Are we making progress on those things? Are problems coming through? And how do we cut through the problems that we're recognizing? And again, the final thing might be, are we getting the right data? Have we got the facts? Have we got one source of the truth? And again, from a communication point of view, actually, ideally, the communication that we're using should be based on facts and on data rather than just on feelings and assumptions. And when we talk about who might be in the guiding coalition, typically there's going to be somebody who's going to be an executive sponsor. Somebody in your most senior leadership team will have a role on this. Of those roles we talked about before, you're going to have change leader or change leaders. You might want someone who's a subject matter expert on whatever your change is about. We're going to have some change managers, those people who are involved with the doing. We'll need specific project managers in terms of picking up the projects that will make the change happen, because change very rarely is just one project. It's normally a program with a multitude of projects that are connected together. And who are going to be local representatives, whether that's our change champions, as we talked about before. So working out who's in your guiding coalition, what's the role, what's the responsibility of your guiding coalition going forward. And choosing that guiding coalition, two things for us that we'd go, think about these two factors. One is, what power have they got to influence the change, and what support are they showing for the change? And if these kind of axes are on a typical low to high basis, you're going to have some people who are kind of irritants, who aren't really bought into the change, but can't really influence it either. We just need to accept that they're there and think about how we might deal with them, but not give them too much attention. Probably need to focus more on the blockers, how we might kind of help them to overcome the blockages they've got. But actually what we're looking for is, can we get people who are on the right-hand side of this image? The people who are our friends, who are supportive of it, where they can influence it or not, but they might be quite a large population within your organization. But who are your allies? Who are those people who support it and have the power to influence it? Those people should be part of our guiding coalition. And again, we've already mentioned the workplace politics webinar. Within that, we talked about kind of these different characters you might come across in terms of those people who are politically aware and politically unaware, those people who act with integrity, or those people that gameplay. So we kind of talked about a few things in the workplace politics webinar that can help here as well. And again, if we're thinking about from an organizational point of view, what's our top-down organizational view on all this stuff? We use something in our organization with clients we call the 5 C's. What have we got around clarity? What have we got around commitment? How are we building collaboration? What's our capacity for the change? What's our capability for the change? Also need to think about what's a political and a cultural view on these things. We need some kind of force field analysis. What are forces for the change? What are forces against the change? And always thinking about what's the people view, the bottom-up people view. Have we done some good stakeholder mapping? What's the expectations people have? What do they gain? What do they lose? So when we're doing all this, what it helps us to create is this gap analysis. We know where we want to get to, but this gives us our idea of where we are right now. So a number of things we can be doing here, but really important to understand, have we got a gap? How big is that gap? And what might we need to do to move it forwards? And how we bring this change to life is, we kind of talked about this briefly, is through key projects. We talked about the roles in change, so we're using that kind of level of knowledge. But think about what the key projects are, who's going to lead them for you, because this is where people feel actually really involved with the change. They feel that they're involved with it because they're delivering something that makes some kind of impact. Clarity around who's doing what, but also what do we need to do if we need to navigate things differently and do things differently. And again, ideally, we don't want long drawn out change. That can create resistance as people see it's going to go on a long time in the future. So the beauty of key projects is we're breaking our change down into specific chunks. So think about who needs what information that might help remove uncertainty, what choices can we give people, who needs to be involved with making the future happen. Getting this combination right should help you remove a lot of the resistance, or at least limits the resistance that you're going to get, and get more people then bought into the future of the change. So that's kind of the various stages you can go through to think about moving forward from a change point of view. But then we need to think about what's our team's change readiness, which I think, unless anything else you want to add to that stuff, Ricky, we've just covered, it's over to you on change readiness.
No, I think for this, particularly with the key projects, this is a really pivotal moment where you are going to involve the people, as Graham says. So, one of the key elements that we talked about in the last webinar was around how do we involve and engage our people. And if you are involved, if you are engaged, then all of a sudden the how of change, you become invested in, and therefore you are more likely to want that change. You're more likely to see it through, and you're going to help others to come on that journey as well. So the key projects bit is kind of subdividing all the big bits of change and going, right, what are the things that we can get our people owning? So senior leadership, some of the guiding coalition piece is all about how do we set the direction of travel, and the key projects is how we bring that kind of end game to life using the people to be a part of it. Because if you're included in something, you're more likely to embrace it. And that's why the key projects is a fundamental, crucial element of that. In fact, we once sat down with a chief exec of a turnaround organization. He came in, the culture was toxic, it was on its knees. And when we played this process back to him, he said, did that, did that, did that, did that, did that. So there's kind of some validation here that these are a series of steps that when you get them right are going to make your change process significantly easier. And that's why, we kind of label this the blueprint, because we can overcomplicate things, and change is one of those things. Graham and I'm sure you've seen it, Graham, where organizations, they overcomplicate things. Yeah. And there are parts of change that are complex. Let's not get away from it. But fundamentally, we don't need to overcomplicate things. That's the key. So we like simplicity. We like things that people can embrace and manage with on a day-to-day basis, so that change becomes more normal rather than, oh, here we go again. It makes it a little bit easier for your organization to wear. And that kind of leads us nicely into, as Graham built for me, my little segue, that's how to evaluate your team's change readiness. That's easy for me to say. But fundamentally, we talked about this at the very beginning. What we've built for you is effectively an assessment. It's quick and easy. It'll take you 5 minutes. This is not designed to be overly scientific. This is a snapshot. It's your opinion of where you believe your team are right now against change, against either readiness for an existing change that you're about to go forward on, or a future change. You can set that parameter as you embark on this change process. There are 9 questions, so it's not going to take you long, and it is designed to give you a snapshot. It's a rapid assessment. Like I say, it's not scientific. It's not designed to be a deep navel gazing exercise. What you will get, though, is you will get a report instantly that will give you a score. And in that score, it will give you a sense of where you're at each of those different elements. It will give you where your hotspots are, where your strengths are, and where your weaknesses are. So you can hone in on those areas that are going to make all the difference. And this is an example, a test case for us, just giving you an example of what that report would look like. But as you can see, there's some red, amber, greens on there. and where the reds are, clearly that's where we would encourage you to focus. And the link to this, let me share, and I'll also put it in the chat for you if you're looking to take that test. And of course, we will share that as well in the follow-up stuff that we do. So
I think you mentioned, it's been tested by a few people. Feedback's been really positive. We had one person, didn't we, come to us say, actually, ideally, you want everyone in the organisation to take this to get that kind of sense of where people feel they are from a change readiness point of view. Yeah,
absolutely. So you can then compare notes. Do we see this the same?
I think it would be interesting if you had one of those guiding coalitions that we talked about. If you recognise you've got a group of people, just get everyone in that group to do this independently. And then just
do we all see it the same way?
Do we all see it the same way? I think it would be a really interesting exercise if anyone's got a change going on right now and has got a small group of people leading the change. See where your differences are, as well as obviously where you agree. I guess either positively, indifferently, or negatively.
Yeah, definitely. So the link to that is it's on the screen, but it's also in the chat as well. So so make the most of it. It's a free resource for you to get a sense check of not only what my strengths are, what my weaknesses are, but also what you'll see is we'll give you some support material in terms of things to think about, things to consider. Not all the answers are in there, but it will give you a great start in terms of things to consider, whether that's about the way you see things, the way your people see things, or other stakeholders. So I would encourage you to make the most of that resource. So summarizing then what we've been through, we've talked about ensuring your change efforts don't fall short. So be mindful of the marathon effect. Be mindful that we as leaders are impatient. Yes, of course we are. We want to drive results. We want to drive the organization forward. And that's what a leader's role is. But let's help the people behind you at least stay on your coattails long enough to see the change through. So sometimes you might need to think about how do we not leave people behind. I think it's the Marines or the US Army, isn't it, that go, no, we leave nobody behind. Yeah. So it's that kind of philosophy. How do you define the shift you're aiming for? Graham talked you through some of these areas, some of these steps. The vision, the purpose they're the glue that's going to hold this all together. But how do we define what it is we want and what makes that compelling and important? And who does it matter to? Who's bothered by this? So let's think about how we engage people along that journey. How do we create compelling stories that inspire action? Well, as Graham says, if you want to change somebody's mindset, stories is a brilliant way to do that. And stories that shape that vision of the future can be really, really powerful. And we would be strong advocates for that. And then we've talked about how you evaluate your team's change readiness. If you've got tools, then clearly you're going to use those. But what we've done is we've created a tool that can make that a little bit easier, quicker, and gives you some instant feedback in terms of where it thinks you're at right now. So that brings us to Q&A. We've got around 5 minutes, I think, left on the clock, or maybe a bit more, actually, 7 minutes on the clock. We're not necessarily saying we're going to keep all of them going, but we have some questions. So are there any questions in the comments so far, Graham?
Not at the moment, no. I guess while we wait for people to drop any in, I know one of the common questions we get asked is around how you deal with people who are resisting change. And I know we touched on some of that last time around, and we've touched on it very briefly today. But what would our recommendations be on when people go, how do you deal with your resistors?
Well, there's a couple of ways to think about this. There's the classic what we call ICE, which we covered in the last webinar, which is about, okay, so who needs some information? So what stories are they making up that aren't true, that aren't built on fact or data or evidence? They've kind of put 2 and 2 together and come up with a very different number. At what choices can we give them so that we give them a sense of feeling of control, and that kind of helps to temper some of that resistance. And the engagement piece, which is what we talked about in these key projects. How do we involve them? How do we engage people in that building the future that we want to have? But I think one of the things you and I talk about a lot, Graham, is about, let's not make the resistors feel like they're winning.
Yeah.
Because inevitably in any change situation, you get the kind of classic bell curve where you've got one end people going over my dead body type attitude, and then at the other end you've got people that go, bring it on, let's get on, where has this been all my life type philosophy. And really what we want to do is work out, how do we embrace the energy, the vibrancy, the just sheer enthusiasm for this change to help us to sway the middle bit of the bell curve, which are people who are waiting to see how this plays out.
Yeah.
Convince me this is worth coming on the journey for you. Convince me this is worth my while. And actually, who better to convince them than people who are already bought into this? Because as leaders, we're going to give them the narrative, we're going to give them the story, we're going to share some powerful ideals around what we think we should be and all of those things, and want them to come along. But actually, who better than those people that have already made that connection? So how do we engage them? Because if you don't, the middle group are going to wait to see who's winning. And if you focus all your energy on the resistors, then they're going to give the impression that they're winning, because all your effort is going into managing the resistance as opposed to leveraging the enthusiasm, the energy that comes with those that are already bought in and let's get on with it type mentality.
Yeah, I think the thing about it is also it can be better. It can energize you more as a manager, can't it? Working with the people who are fully on board or the people who are partly on board, because it's much more positive. You know, if you can build momentum at that end, as you say, at the other end, some of those people will naturally move along, and then you're left with your real minority.
Or what do they call it? Mood hoovers, isn't it? Or something like that?
Yeah, mood hoovers, yeah.
So do you want to spend your time with people who are battling everything? Or do you want to spend time with people that are, solution focused, that are energetic, that are problem solvers, that doesn't matter what comes up, they'll find a way around it. They'll embrace the opportunity to solve something and move it forward. I mean, I certainly get energized by spending time with that group.
Yeah.
Because the other end of the spectrum, it's just a battle.
Yeah. No other questions, Ricky, in the chat.
So I have one for you, Graham, that comes up all the time, which is, why does change take so long?
I think a number of reasons. I think the biggest one for me, the thing that I think a lot of people forget. Let's go right back to the start of the webinar, pretty much with your marathon effect. I think people forget that. We've got these different groups of people, and typically the kind of people who make those kind of comments are normally your more senior leaders, because they've dealt with it, they've processed it, they've moved on. They're on to the next change. And I think for me, the reality is change will take as long as it takes for the last person to cross the finish line. And mentioned the London Marathon earlier. The thing that I've seen about that is they keep a finish line up until the last person crosses the line. It's not the normal one that blocks off it, but they keep a finish line up. So whenever you complete the London Marathon, you have that sense of you've done it. Because it'd be really easy to go, well, 95% of people have done, let's clear away everything. But they keep something up that's symbolic for those people who finish last. And I think it's That's why change takes so long. It's because you've got somebody who's carrying a lot of weight, a lot of baggage, have got their own challenges in completing the course. And I think we forget about them. So the change never feels like it's completed. And again, the other thing often is we do one change and then we move on to the next one. So it's never actually finished anyway. But that's a bit for me. Remember your marathon runners. Remember your people who are going to cross the finish line a lot later than everybody else. How do we help those people speed up a little bit? What help, what support do they need? Will help you change move a little bit quicker.
Brilliant. Thank you, Graham. Okay. Well, we're kind of done. So just a couple of things to remind you. You can find us on LinkedIn. We have a monthly newsletter. So if you're not subscribed to that, we put great content out on a monthly basis. And we've got a growing YouTube following, a growing YouTube content base, which more and more clients are using as a resource for their people to go to. So certainly make use of that. There's lots of various different bits of content around leadership, around change. And there's kind of a load of podcasts in there as well. So we got probably 450 pieces of content in all. Some are short, some are long form. So make the most of that because it's free to anybody who wants to use it. There's 110,000 people that are already subscribed to that. And then from Graham and I, as always, thank you for tuning in, whether you're tuning in live or whether you're tuned in to the recording. We really do appreciate you taking the time to listen to us. And we wanted to segue you through to next month's webinar, which is all about how to make better decisions at work. And I know Graham's got a lot to say on this because he's been doing some work on this with a client recently.
Just recently, yeah.
And when I did some research, it seems to be a hot topic. You know, this concept of making decisions and being confident in the decisions that you make, and being comfortable in your own environment. And I've got some insight from the chief exec of Prostate Cancer UK, who gave us some brilliant content that we can add in and add value to the audience next time round. So from Graham and I, thank you very much.
Thanks
and
today,
we'll see you on the 14th.
See you next time.